You want to go to the places where there's the least amount of competition.
And then sort of like, pioneer it.
Yeah, right. You want to take advantage of the platform not only while there's the fewest amount of people, but where the platform has a vested interest in you succeeding.
Welcome to The Portfolio Life. I'm Jeff Goins. This is the podcast that helps you pursue work that matters, make a difference with your art, and discover your true voice. In this episode, we get to meet Ryan Holiday, a guy who very much embodies the portfolio life. He's not only a writer, but also a successful marketer who has worked with best-selling authors such as Tim Ferriss, as well as big brands like American Apparel. And throughout all of that, he's learned how to apply what he's learned to his own career. Ryan and I talk about how he got started by dropping out of college to apprentice under an author, what it takes to educate yourself in a craft like writing, and the attitude that you need to ultimately succeed at anything. I think you're really going to get a kick out of it. I sure did. If you like what you hear, I hope you check out Ryan's book, The Obstacle is the Way. Here is my chat with Ryan. Ryan, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. I want to talk about a couple of things. You have no idea what we're going to talk about,
right?
Which is always fun. And I don't either, but because I have you on the line, I want to, basically pick your brain on all things book marketing. And I want to do it really within the context of the subject of your new book, which I recently finished, The Obstacle is the Way. So, one of the things that I hear, and I get to talk to a lot of writers and artists and even aspiring entrepreneurs, and I don't know how much of this you get. I feel like it's especially predominant in the writer and creative and artistic community where we let the impediments kind of get in our way. And I think probably one of the biggest impediments is nobody cares what I have to say, or I don't have a platform, or probably the biggest on the list is nobody will publish me.
Sure.
So you've been through that. I mean, you've helped authors make a splash with their own work. You've helped huge corporate brands succeed. And you're doing it for yourself now. And you've done it really, frankly, at an incredibly young age. Talk a little bit about how you've worked through your own internal resistance. How have obstacles become the way in which you have succeeded? I mean, that's basically the idea behind your book is...
Sure.
This thing that is in your way that you feel like is an excuse to quit or give up or change course is maybe, in fact, the secret to success in some kind of weird way.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because, like a lot of people, I wanted to be a writer, and I knew this pretty early on. I knew it when I was a teenager that I wanted to be a writer. But it's what do you do next, right?
Right.
So you write a lot, and then you think okay, I just have to magically interest someone in my work, and then I'm going to become successful. Because when you're on the outside, you think publishers are these sort of market makers who pick someone from obscurity and then thrust them into the spotlight. And of course, that's not only not true, but no one wants to publish a teenage writer, because why? There's so many other better people who are safer bets. You know what I mean? And so I think the mistake that a lot of writers make that I was fortunate enough to get thrust in a different direction and thus didn't make is they focus on the one thing that they can, that they focus on the thing that's easiest to focus on, which is getting really good at writing. So it's okay, I'm a nobody, I don't have a platform, I want to be a writer. I'm just going to spend all my time writing. I'm going to move into the woods and I'm just going to write a lot. Or I'm going to go get an MFA and spend, tens of thousands of dollars, and I'm going to train myself as a writer, which is really great, except for now, 4 or 5 years later, you're a great writer, but still no one will publish you. You don't have a platform, and you don't want to do, you don't know how to market books. So for me, I ended up apprenticing under a couple really good writers, but doing marketing for them. And so as I was learning how to write, I was learning, my job was to do all the marketing stuff for them. And I sort of figured out how you build a platform, how you build a brand. I developed relationships with the media. I saw an interesting part of culture, this sort of online culture, that I then channeled back into my writing. And so when I finally had my first book idea, this was in, I guess, late 2010, early 2011, writing it was easy because I practiced. But then once I wrote it, I was able to go sell it because I was able to say, like, look, I've been featured in these media outlets. I have this many Twitter followers. I have this many email addresses. And I've worked with these 5 authors who have spent cumulatively this much time on the bestseller list. I'm a safe bet.
Right. So I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned that you apprenticed under a number of authors, and I remember reading that you kind of began this process of going after internationally best-selling business author Robert Greene, whom I've interviewed before and who's been on the show. And I loved that part in his book Mastery where he talks about apprenticing, because I feel like this is sort of a lost art in our culture. And I think especially in the arts and certainly in business, we need more opportunities for young people who just want to go be awesome right now, who just want to go write a book, and hit the New York Times bestsellers list without actually having to go through the work of, sort of sitting under a master and learning, not by just like having coffee with them, which I think is sort of like the cheap, substitute for apprenticeship in our, modern age, but to actually do it with them as you did. How did you do that? I mean, how did you get an opportunity to apprentice under Robert Greene?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I not only learned from this guy that had sold millions of books and I think books that people are going to be reading 100 years from now, but like he paid me to learn from him, which is sort of the ideal scenario, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
What I did was I took something that I was good at. I was good at research. I was good at reading. I was good at taking notes, and I had an unlimited sort of amount of energy and desire to sort of do what anyone asked me to do. I ended up meeting Robert through another author that I met, which I think people overestimate or underestimate. It's like, look, who do authors know? They know other authors. So you start with one author, and now all of a sudden you have access to 5 authors, and then it sort of, grows from there. What I was able to do is, I was a huge fan of Robert. I'd read all his stuff. I had this sort of chance lunch encounter with him through the author that I knew. And Robert was looking for a researcher for his books. And I said, like, look, I'll do it for free. Like, I will do anything you ask. I'll transcribe your interviews. I'll take notes. I'll copy papers, whatever you want. And he said, like, look, like, I don't let anyone work for me for free. I'm going to pay you a little bit of money, but here's all the things that I want you to do. And I started there, and it grew into, a much more involved relationship. I worked with him on 2 books, and then he hired me and my company to do the marketing for both those books as well.
Wow. So what did you learn working under this author who had sold millions of books? So here you are saying, as a teenager, someday I'd like to write books and do this thing. But instead of going out and just trying to do it, you did something that I wish more people did, which is sort of humble yourself and say, I'm willing to do anything. And I think that is an important part of apprenticeship, of mentoring, of learning, is not just going, hey, I just want to take all the awesome things that you have to offer, but any of the difficult stuff, I'm not really interested in that. You did whatever was necessary because it was all an opportunity to learn. So what did you learn from him?
It's weird to say, like, it wasn't like one thing, obviously. Right, it was like a million things. But I think a couple of the big ones, I learned like how you craft a book. I think that's a big thing that people don't understand. It's like a publisher is giving you potentially a lot of money and then just hoping you magically come back with a book like 6 months or a year later. And they have to trust that you're going to be able to do that. And from Robert, I saw a book get crafted twice from sort of soup to nuts. And so, like, a lot of what Robert taught me wasn't explicit. I just learned it by observation. And as he would give me tasks, I would say, oh, wow, that's a good way to do it. I'm going to adopt that into my own system. So I learned how to research books. I learned how to interview people. I learned how to organize a book. I learned how to look for sort of gems or hidden things that maybe other people were missing. I learned how to sort of craft like a big concept, how to tackle a big concept. And then I learned how much work it is. Like, I saw how exacting and dedicated he was, how like I would call him in the middle of the day when I knew he was home, but he wouldn't answer his phone because he was writing. Like, I saw all that and I just learned from example.
So let's talk marketing now. So you have worked with a number of authors, some of which we've mentioned already: Robert, Tim Ferriss, Tucker Max. Not just successful authors, but like wildly successful authors. Selling millions of books, hitting all the number one spots on bestsellers lists. Before you were doing that, what were you learning from life that gave you? I mean, I'm reading all these quotes of people saying you just have sort of this natural knack for finding ways to turn, a book into these ideas that spread, which is really, I think we know, like that's how a book sells. People are talking about it and it's the idea behind a book. But how do you actually find those nuggets? And you seem to have a natural knack for that. But I want to know where does that come from? What in life and what sort of experience prepared you for having this knack for marketing and PR and helping take ideas and turning them into these things that pass along very easily?
Yeah, like I think what I learned is something that I think a lot of people miss with books is that selling a book is selling an idea. No one buys a book unless they buy into the idea. So to me, marketing something like a book is not that different than marketing a T-shirt for American Apparel or marketing a startup or a tech product or anything. It's about selling the idea to people and getting them to take it to be interested in it enough to take a chance and to buy it. And so I was able to learn, like, one, it was interesting. I learned from history and through Robert how this has always been done throughout society. And then in working with authors who'd had, established brands, I would set one of my authors up, whether it was Robert or Tucker or Tim, with like a podcast. And I would see how quickly it would move books, or I would connect them with someone who had a big email list and I would see it sell copies right away on Amazon. And then maybe the publisher from somewhere else, I might coordinate an interview with like the New York Times. Mm-hmm. Or a TV show, and I would see the Amazon rank not move at all. Yeah. So I sort of had this front row seat to like which levers actually moved sales. And of course, also with some of my more controversial clients, or when I was working with Tim and he'd never put out a book before, a lot of those more prestigious outlets weren't even on the table. So it was like, how do you cobble together enough blogging support, enough online support to compensate for that? And so we ended up just, experimenting. And I worked with, Tucker, who was my first client, is Tucker Max. And I realize he's a very controversial author, but he was the first blogger to turn a blog into a New York Times best-selling book, but with basically no media attention. So we were able to sort of, because no one wanted to touch it, right? So we were able to see what things really moved the needle. And we were forced to try things that maybe other authors wouldn't do.
So how did you get somebody like Tucker to hire you to help him in the first place?
It was the same thing. I started as an intern, but in his place, like, he didn't know anything about book marketing either.
Sure.
And he got something like a $7,500 advance for his first book.
Yeah.
And this book went on to sell like 2 million copies, but it's not like he could really afford to hire an A-list publicist either. So we were just sort of making it up as we went along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's like the short list of things that always seem to sell books? What's the secret, Ryan?
Well, first off, I think people write books and they don't actually know who they're writing it for, or who that audience is. Mm-hmm. So, like, the biggest thing for me is actually writing a book that people will talk about, not just writing some cobbled together, mediocre book. But I think, obviously email is the huge lever. I think social media matters. I think doing interesting things. A lot of authors are way too protective of their work. So it's like they keep everything captured up inside the pages and they refuse to give it away. One of the most successful book promotions I've ever done was we gave away like a 600 megabyte bundle of content from Tim Ferriss on BitTorrent, did like 3 million downloads, sold tens of thousands of books. It's about experimenting with new things. Like right now, if someone is telling you that Twitter is the way to sell books, I would actually think about something else. What's the new platform? Maybe people aren't using Goodreads enough, and then you do Goodreads. Or maybe there's some Book Vibes is another site I've started using and thinking about that I think is really interesting. Maybe you go there. You want to go to the places where there's the least amount of competition.
And then sort of like, pioneer it.
Yeah, right. You want to take advantage of the platform not only while there's the fewest amount of people, but where the platform has a vested interest in you succeeding.
Yeah, it's interesting because this approach sort of mirrors your experience in this world, like in your career, which is you didn't know what you didn't know, and you figured it out through the process, and then. What's cool is I go, like, how did you get Tucker Max or Tim Ferriss to hire you? But, while forgetting that when these guys were launching their first books, nobody wanted to touch them. And so similarly, you were finding authors that hadn't yet been broken yet, hadn't become a big deal, and finding, ways to kind of create the new path.
Right. If it's like, hey, how could I get Tucker or Tim to hire me? It's like, go back to 2006, 2007 and ask them.
Yeah, so what's interesting to me about this is in many ways, I can see how the principles in your book, The Obstacle is the Way, how either these principles have influenced your career or maybe the lessons that you've learned have made you realize, wow, this is just true. But the book is basically about your fascination with Stoicism, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that? What does that mean? What does it mean to be a modern Stoic, and how can that be beneficial as an author, as somebody who wants his ideas to spread?
Yeah, sure. So Stoicism is a practical philosophy. It's not like a religion. It's not academic philosophy. It's not some complicated explanation of the universe. It's like a set of tools and strategies written by successful, interesting people over time that were sort of reminding themselves how to deal with the problems of life, whether that's the problem of success or the problem of adversity or the problem of money, or any number of problems you see in the Stoic writers, and I include Marcus Aurelius in there, Seneca in there, Epictetus in there. There's this great sort of class of writers writing around the turn of the millennium about just writing about life and how to deal with it. That's Stoicism in its most simple form. It says, hey, we don't control the world, we just control how we respond to it. And the Stoicism is sort of a way to respond to it. And in this book, I wanted to take just one lesson from Stoicism. It's this quote from Marcus Aurelius where he says, the impediment to action advances action, what stands in the way becomes the way. And I wanted to illustrate it with stories from history where people have taken an obstacle and then seen it not as an impediment, but as a chance to advance whatever cause or thing they were doing. And yeah, that's what I've tried to apply that in my own life, certainly, and I think some of the things we were just talking about were examples of that. But really, I wanted to illustrate it with examples from other people from history, not only for other people to learn from, but as a reminder to myself, because it's not like I'm not sitting here saying like, oh, I figured it all out, you should learn from me. I'm saying other people have figured it out. Let's learn from them together.
I love two things. One, the subtitle, The Timeless Art of Turning Trials into Triumph. So we started this conversation talking about how a lot of authors, a lot of creatives, a lot of people in the business world, they run into an obstacle and they go, well, this isn't meant to be, and so I've got to go do something else, or nobody wants to publish my book, therefore it's never going to get published. So the first thing I love is this idea that your disadvantages can be turned into advantages. And you've talked about working with these no-name authors who were not wanted by the mainstream media, right? Right. And this was right around the time when the Oprah effect was waning, when Oprah herself was, waning, when
sure.
she was, in her show, when she went off and did her own network and, did that whole deal, and kind of paved the way for what everybody wants a piece of now, which is how do I get a bunch of bloggers to talk about my book, because I know that moves the needle. And as you mentioned, Tucker was like the first guy to do that with his own blog and then turn it into a best-selling book. So I love that. I love that idea. And in the book, you tell a story, which I think is like an old Zen story or something. You can kind of help me fill in the gaps. But there's this story about this king who has this treasure, and there's a big rock in the middle of the road, and he buries it under the rock, and then all these people are walking down the path, and they run into this rock, and they turn around, or they go, oh, we can't keep going, and then one guy goes and gets a lever and big stick or something, and lifts the rock and finds the treasure, and it's this idea that a lot of people run into obstacles and they'll turn around, but those who find a way to, overcome the obstacle, there's a treasure, not necessarily on the other side, but underneath it, which is this great illustration of the fact that the obstacle is the way, the thing in your way is actually could be a tool for your success. What I like about it is like he didn't like get stronger or like really try to push the boulder really hard or hire a bunch of people. He got smarter and he found a strategic way to get the rock out of his way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was tweeting about this last night. I don't know if you saw, but there was a trending Twitter topic. The hashtag was "We need diverse books." Right, I saw that. It's sort of blowing up, and my response to that is maybe a little unpolitically correct, or it may be contrarian, but I agree. There's not enough diverse, interesting books out there. There's a lot of books by like white guys, right? Right. But the idea that the solution to that problem is to demand that traditional publishers publish more diverse books is so misguided that you sort of don't know where you need to start with it. In fact, what I'm saying is that, okay, look, publishers care about one thing. They care about past sales. That's the only thing they look at to judge whether they should buy a book or not. Past sales. In a genre, for a particular author, for a particular type of book, whatever. So there's no way that you're just going to guilt them into publishing these books. And if they do, and they publish it and they don't believe in it and it doesn't do well, it actually reduces the chances for people to be successful going forward. So instead, to me, this is actually a huge opportunity. Traditional publishing refuses to publish something that you are convinced there is a viable, significant audience for. Well, unlike a movie or a startup or a play, you don't need very much money to create a book. Self-publishing is a viable option for a book. So if you think we need diverse books, don't tweet about it. Go write one and publish it, sell a lot of copies for it, and then not only will traditional publishers be begging you to publish, you'll have all the leverage, and they'll have to pay much more than they ever would have if they gave you some pity chance now.
So what is one obstacle, one trial that you've personally faced in your life that you turned into a triumph?
It's funny. That's like the one question that I've obviously gotten the most times with the book. And I get that when you write a book about obstacles, that's like, that's the first question. But like, look, the reason I didn't include my own obstacles is that I understand that obstacles are very relative. So I don't want to sit here and patronize someone who lost their parents when they were 3 years old or came from some war-torn country with the story about, I don't know, like I went through a breakup and it was really hard, but now I'm like way better for it. You know what I mean? Like that's absurd.
Yeah.
And actually one of the messages of the book is that we don't choose what obstacles happen to us. Sometimes you're going to have all the obstacles happen to you really young in life. Sometimes you're going to have a lot of small ones instead of one big one. Or sometimes your life is going to be super fine up until you're 55 years old, and then a bunch of terrible stuff's going to happen to you all right in a row. You really have no idea. But we all face on a day-to-day basis, and I think this actually goes to your book, we all face on a day-to-day basis the sort of the in-between of like how we want things to be and then how they actually are. And we have to navigate that and make the best of it. And like, that's what I want. I don't want people to think like adversity is like big stuff that happens to you usually early on in life, and then you get over it and then everything is fine. Like I see adversity as something that happens on a daily basis. You're trying to do X and it turns out more like Y. So now you have a choice. What do you do about it? And I try to think about the attitude in the book always. It's like, I have an employee, he makes a mistake, costs me money. Do I get upset and I yell at him? Or do I say like, look, is this a teachable moment? How do we learn from this? Or, I get in a fight with my fiance. Am I going to get all upset and bitter and angry? or are we going to use it to talk and communicate and grow from it? Or I'm tired and I feel lazy. Am I going to indulge that feeling, or am I going to say this is a chance for me to get over that? I'm going to push through it. Or like, look, I think the final example is like, I have this book coming out, and as you experienced, you work and work and work until your release date, and then you just have to hope that it works out, and you sit back and you just wait for the numbers to come in, and there's nothing you can do about it, and all you can do when the numbers come in is accept them and be happy with them. You can't argue against them. There's nothing you can do about it. So like next week, I'm gonna be faced with a choice when those numbers come in. Do I get frustrated? Do I feel disappointed? Do I feel like a failure? Do I get all excited and say that these numbers are validation and that I'm awesome and that I knew I could do it and all this stuff? Or do I just sort of take them with equanimity and move on and keep working and do what I have to do?
Yeah. Love it. So the book is The Obstacle is the Way. Subtitle is The Timeless Art of Turning Trials into Triumph. We began this interview talking about how you might be facing an obstacle. Maybe nobody is reading your blog or wants to publish your book, or you can't get any funding for your startup. In this book, Ryan Holiday talks about how those obstacles, those things that feel like disadvantages, how with the right spirit and mindset you can turn those into advantages. And what I loved about the book is it's just little vignette after vignette of these famous people from history who have done just that. People like John D. Rockefeller, Amelia Earhart, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, people from ancient emperors to modern day entrepreneurs. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. Ryan, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Portfolio Life. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Ryan Holiday, and be sure to check out his book, The Obstacle is the Way. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. That helps us reach more people, and it also gives us valuable feedback. This is admittedly a work in progress that we keep wanting to make better and better. You can also visit me online at my blog, goinswriter.com, fill out the contact page, and let me know of any ideas for future shows or questions that you have that we could answer in future episodes. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Selling a book is selling an idea. No one buys a book unless they buy into the idea. So to me, marketing something like a book is not that different than marketing a T-shirt for American Apparel, or marketing a startup or a tech product or anything. It's about selling the idea to people and getting them to take it, to be interested in it enough to take it